I call Todd Muller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to just spend a few minutes here in the third reading, obviously speaking very much in favour of the Arts Centre of Christchurch bill. And it's been quite a journey, actually, to follow this through as an incoming and new backbencher. It's been, of course, great to be on the Select Committee with my chair and colleagues, of course, from across the House. And this was one of the first bills that were essentially put in front of us as a new committee to progress. And can I add my voice to those who have spoken already and acknowledge Nikki Wagner, Honourable Nikki Wagner, the leadership that she's brought to this. Of course, our chair, Scott Simpson, and I do think it is worth a moment to reflect in what at times has been a pretty rancorous last few weeks, particularly from one side of the House, to actually hear the collegial comments mostly from the other side around the approach that has been taken as we have walked our way through this particular bill and provided opportunities for those who have interest in this to make their submissions felt and heard. And of course, as noted, and I'll talk shortly, we had the opportunity to actually go down and visit the site. Mr Speaker, as we know, this bill is all about essentially establishing in perpetuity the purpose of the Trust and giving the appropriate governance arrangements for this community, for the Christchurch community, and for this world-class precinct. As we've heard, well over 20 buildings, 24 buildings, 23 made of stone, various durations, as we've heard, go back to 1878, and all but one impacted severely through the earthquake of February 2011. And one of the highlights, certainly for me, as we've gone through this bill, has been the opportunity to go and visit the site and actually see firsthand what we are trying to put in stone in a legislative context down in Christchurch. And to be able to see the wide array of stonemasons working on their craft, seeing the pallets of stones ready to be put into the new buildings, actually I found quite an enjoyable experience. And as Mr Simpson has mentioned in his comments, it was quite extraordinary seeing parts of the buildings that have had their old fascia removed and suddenly something of even more moment standing behind it and be able to see that and know that through this tragedy actually there will be something that is more enduring and more powerful for the community of Christchurch and indeed the wider country. We saw the rooms in which Lord Rutherford was a young student. An area that was an old swimming pool, sir, has now been turned into an outside promenade. And even though it was a very cold summer's day, we could picture what it will look like when the community of Christchurch fully engage into the site in the next few years once the building project has been completed. And what a building project this is. 7 years, $300 million, and it is absolutely worth to add my voice to those who are very close to this. Jean Crawford, the Chair, Andre Lovett, the CE, and I think it's a very well-made point that not only have they had a business as usual requirement in their jobs, but to be able to oversee what is declared as the largest heritage rebuild going on in the world at the moment, I think is a testament to them, the skills that they have, that they are bringing to the table and the team that they have around them, so they should be acknowledged for that. Mr Speaker, the key deliveries of this bill, one of the key ones discussed here already is setting out the charitable objects of the Trust and enshrining that so there is absolute clarity for the community around the purpose of the Trust and what it is there for. I think the moves and the changes with respect to the governance structure is very well thought through, and the community of Christchurch and the stakeholders of Christchurch should be acknowledged and recognised. University of Canterbury, the Christchurch City Council, Heritage New Zealand, Christchurch Civic Trust, Papatipu Runanga. These are key stakeholders who historically have had a very direct linkage into the governance of this organisation. And it was a representative governance model, which so often is the case in organisations like this. But it takes some courage to be able to look at the scale of the rebuild that is occurring in Christchurch on this precinct and realise that if you genuinely wish to be world class in terms of protecting and enhancing a building and a series of buildings that are in place in that precinct, then it is appropriate to have world class best practice governance arrangements as well. It's not easy to move from a representative model to a skills-based model, particularly in a tight community such as Christchurch, who have always had such direct representative governance around this arts centre. So they should be acknowledged. I think that is a very strong step forward and obviously a key component of this bill. I do hold the view, though, that now, once we have this third reading and ultimately this bill becomes law, there is an opportunity for those who are going to participate in this new governance structure to ensure that they take off their parochial lenses, because it is very easy for communities to think that they are the sole harbinger of what is good and best practice when it comes to precincts like this. But as we've heard earlier from Megan Woods when she reflected on the comments of the former Prime Minister Norman Kirk around the importance of bringing a wide strand of perspective and engagement around this precinct, so too does it fit, in my view, that there should be a wide strand and diverse governance skills get brought around this board. So now there is an opportunity for those stakeholders to be able to put forward people. I would ask them to consider to not necessarily put forward just people from their own organisations or from whence they've come. They should look external, not only external to Christchurch, but external potentially to New Zealand, to ensure that the governance, that the mix of skills that sit around that board are generally world class. Because ultimately, Mr. Speaker, for this legislation to endure in time, these phenomenal stone buildings need to engage with people, with communities, and as we have noted through this process, the community of Christchurch is very different to the one that built these buildings all those years ago, and the community of Christchurch in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years and beyond will equally change and become more diverse. And buildings are ultimately just stone buildings, however beautiful they may be, if they don't have people connected with them and people inside them, and if they're not evocative to people, then they are simply that, just stone buildings. This precinct is far more than this. It has got an incredibly evocative power to the people of Christchurch, and for that to be maintained and enhanced and to grow, they must ensure that that precinct continues to engage in a way that is quite profound and moves with the evolving nature of the community. Mr. Speaker, the other key change that we reflected on, and I think is a good one from a good practice perspective, is the removal of the requirement for the Minister to be informed of vacancies. I think that was a minor change, but one that I think, if you're looking at it through a belts and braces lens, which we did, I think was an appropriate amendment. Also, Mr. Speaker, the requirement to have the conservation plan available at the annual meeting. We had quite a lot of debate about this, and again, I think it is a very sensible amendment to this bill, and one that, by the sound of it, we will have cross-party support for, because it ensures that those who have a strong connection with this precinct, with this arts centre, can have visibility at an annual, at a time every year as to the vision around conservation that the board has, and to give them comfort that the institution is heading in the right direction. So, Mr. Speaker, can I conclude by adding finally my congratulations to the Honourable Nikki Wagner. This is something that, as a local MP, she has championed well. She is a great MP for the people of Christchurch. That's why they have voted her back with the strength that she has, and I can see why, because she is a great advocate for Christchurch. She knows what's important for Christchurch, and she has, through her leadership, facilitated through a bill which is going to benefit the community of Christchurch for many decades to come. Thank you very much.
Good speak.
Speaker.